So in previous weeks I've talked about approaches to production which are based on the idea of using techniques which are usually described as post-production, editing and mixing, as the basis for the creative writing and arranging process. I've talked about the history of these approaches, such as Miles Davis's method of recording in the late 1960s, the development of dub reggae in the early 1970s, and beat juggling and sampling in the 1980s hip-hop. And I talked about their African American and Afro-Caribbean origins. Last week I was talking about active listening with the specific intention of changing what you're listening to. And this week I want to extend that and to discuss mixing as a way of exploring and recording materials and coming up with ideas for edits and arrangements. What I mean by this is mixing a track that's deliberately not what you want the final product to be. Now that may seem counterintuitive, and of course it doesn't make sense if somebody has recorded pretty much exactly what they want, but if there's a bit of creative scope, if I'm talking about exploring a song in order to find interesting textures and combinations, about working on the structure and the arrangement after the main recording process is complete, then I think this works very well. My forthcoming Failing Upwards album is an extreme version of that sort of project because I recorded the band, 2 drummers, 2 bass players, guitars, keyboard, trumpet, sax and violin, with that sort of post-production process specifically in mind. In fact, I've been mixing and remixing all the way through the production process, trying out different parts together and editing them together in different combinations. Fairly early on in the process, I decided that there were going to be 2 mixes of the album, and I think that now there may even be 3. The first version will be 12 mixes of short versions of the songs, between 3 and 4 minutes each, and the aim for them is to keep the energy level of each song up. They're a sort of short attention span version of the songs, saying everything as succinctly and as punctually as possible. And the second version will be a single 70-minute mix of the whole album, longer versions of all the songs which also segue into each other. This is the more intense listening experience for people who still believe in the idea of an album as a coherent whole. I've also been having a lot of fun creating short instrumental and dub versions of the track for promoting it on Instagram and Twitter, and I'm thinking I may create a third dub mix of the whole album. So the track that's playing in the background is called Do It, and on the longer album version the drums build slowly throughout the whole track, starting out with the 2 drummers playing quietly with their hands instead of sticks, and then increasing the dynamics as they go through. Here's a short section of that to give you an idea. For the short mix I decided to edit a version together with a more consistent dynamic. It still goes up and down a bit, but it's played with the sticks and it's much less varied from that perspective. There are also 2 different rhythmic versions of the bass and the kick drum. This one, and this one. Finally, there are 2 different guitar parts which both work separately but don't go together particularly well, although they do both go with Janette Mason's clavinet part. And Janette also played an electric piano part that created a bit more space, and I've put that under the trumpet solo. And all these choices and combinations came about because I've been experimenting with edits and mixes all the way through the process. Obviously, this process is taken to the extreme in the Failing Upwards album. I've been recording a lot of varied performances, but I've always found it useful to explore a track through some playful and experimental mixes before I settle down to try and get the one. And it not only means that I find interesting and unusual combinations that might spice up the arrangements in different places, but I also often notice little details that need fixing. Mixing in a different order than you normally do, like starting with the bass or something that you wouldn't normally do, and listening to instruments in lots of different stripped down combinations. You notice things that might be more difficult to spot in the normal mix process. So, next week I'm going to talk about the use of production to reinforce the story or the narrative in a track.